Today we're diving into a topic that touches all of our lives, our inner dialogue, and especially when it comes to making food choices, those little voices that can be some of the harshest critics or some of the positive cheerleaders when it comes to eating. These food voices can be broadly described as destructive or supportive. We're going to talk about what they are, why they're so important, and how we can strengthen them. If all that sounds good to you, let's go. Hi folks, welcome to our channel, or welcome back. My name is Kat. I'm a licensed and registered dietitian nutritionist, and on this channel I like to talk about weight inclusive and weight neutral focused approaches to health, and that includes what we are talking about today, which is food voices. Now, food voices comes from the framework of intuitive eating. Intuitive eating is a framework that was created by two dietitians in the 90s and have since continued to adapt and evolve and provide today what a lot of registered dietitians and other people use to help promote a healthy relationship with food. Now, contrary to popular belief, intuitive eating is not just eating like whatever, whenever kind of thing. It's actually a series. There's a framework within intuitive eating. It's not just about eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full. In fact, sometimes things like medication or certain conditions can make us not hungry and we still need nourishment. And so there's a lot that goes into intuitive eating. Sometimes people can put their own definition of what intuitive means to them, but in the framework itself, intuitive eating is described as a dynamic interplay of instinct, emotion, and rational thought. But one of my favorite things about the framework of intuitive eating is the idea of food voices. Now, for a lot of people who have spent years dieting, decades dieting, there can be a lot of just kind of noise in their head, dialogue, when it comes to approaching food and choosing foods and what they should choose and what they shouldn't choose. When we boil it down, these voices can be described or classified as like constructive, helpful, supportive, or destructive, unhelpful, and harmful. Now, understanding these voices and the differences between them can really help someone to move to a healthier relationship with food. So let's talk about them. Let's talk about the destructive voices first. All right, so number one is going to be the food police. Now, the food police is a judgmental voice. It categorizes foods and our food choices as good or bad, and that good or bad leading to worry and guilt. This voice is rooted in dieting rules, and it often causes harm without adding any benefits. So on like the unhelpful, helpful kind of scale, it's unhelpful. A lot of times people hear this voice when they're approaching a more compassionate and healthy relationship with food. The food police voice, it can echo kind of former diets that you've done, like rules you've encountered, even like well-meaning advice that has taken a judgmental turn in your mind. This is the voice that scrutinizes like every piece of your plate, every food choice. It can turn a meal, a simple meal, into a source of stress. Now, what makes a food police voice particularly damaging is the kind of black and white thought process, the mentality. It leaves zero room for nuances, which in real life, we need that room. We need to have that nuance. That's just life. Now, the second destructive voice is referred to as the nutrition informant, and the nutrition informant works directly with the food police. Now, the nutrition informant, it can kind of masquerade as a helpful voice, but its guidance is often based in like nutrition misinformation, myths, and just overall incomplete nutrition when it comes to overall nourishing, helpful intake. It's really, really tied together with the food police because the nutrition informant is like informing the police to say whether something is good or bad, which then can lead to that guilt and worry and shame. While the nutrition informant is the like intention is there, it's meant to steer someone in the like helpful direction towards nourishing foods. It can really strip away any of the joy around eating with like causing second guessing around, is this food good enough or not? Is it healthy enough or not? It essentially takes little grains of truth here and there from nutrition and health and wellness sources, and it'll like inflate them into these kind of rigid rules that the food police can then enforce. And that food police then sees that as a all or nothing kind of thing, that black or white thought process. Now, one of the cool things is that with some education and with some compassion, we can shift that nutrition informant voice into what we refer to as the nutrition ally voice. I'll talk more on that in a little bit. Now, let's talk about one more destructive voice, and that is the diet rebel. Now, some might see this as like a helpful voice. There is kind of a helpful alternative to this voice specifically, but the diet rebel itself, that voice is destructive. Now, the diet rebel voice, it really kind of clashes with the food police, so you might think that it would be helpful, but it's really not. It reacts to the restrictions put on by the food police. The voice rises almost as a result of the authoritarian voice of the food police and the restriction from the nutrition informant. It's part of you that just wants to break away from like every diet rule and like prove a point to regain a sense of control. Now, this is what we see manifest as binging. This can be different from binge eating disorder, but I'm just talking about the occasional experiences of someone that might have a very restrictive kind of intake, then lead to some kind of like binging and choosing foods that are like opposite of what is deemed good by the food police. Some people might hear that and think that that's good, right? Because you're rebelling against that food police and that kind of restriction of the nutrition informant. But this can actually perpetuate the cycle of guilt and rebellion and really work against building a healthy relationship with food. Oftentimes we see this lead to feelings of guilt, feelings of regret, lack of control from the lack of control. It's a harsh cycle. Now, fortunately, kind of like the nutrition informant, how we can change it and evolve it into the nutrition ally, which we'll talk about, the diet rebel can also evolve into what we call the rebel ally. Okay, so let's move to some of the positive food voices. Now, when I'm working with someone to help them move away from dieting behaviors that are toxic, unhelpful, and really promoting the idea of building a healthier relationship with food through a variety of different exercises, oftentimes the reason behind those specific exercises that we're doing and what we're talking through is to build these positive food voices. Even if we're not like explicitly talking about them, these helpful exercises and actions, things that we're doing to step away from toxic dieting behaviors, it's building up these positive food voices. I'm really excited to talk about them. They really set a tone, voices, several voices, to provide a very like balanced, compassionate, mindful kind of thought process as we approach food. All right, so first up is the food anthropologist. Now, if you've ever taken an anthropology class, or if you haven't, that's okay. It's basically you're studying anthropology, the field of anthropology. One of the definitions, anthropology is a scientific study of humanity, including human behaviors, biology, culture, societies, and linguistics. So like the study and origin of development of humans. One of the foundations of anthropology, though, is really to approach the study as like neutral as you can, not judging, just observing, just having this voice of curiosity and using that curiosity to help with that kind of observation, that non-judgmental observation. Now, the food anthropologist voice takes that idea and puts it on yourself. So if you picture like a scientist, an anthropologist who is observing a group of people, they are noticing behaviors without any bias. They're noticing patterns and influences and the context and the just overall environment. And it keeps this kind of distance away from emotions. Like it can observe those emotions, but it's not going to respond in an emotional kind of way because that can cloud judgment. And so the food anthropologist is one of my favorite food voices to really build up in people because it provides us with so much information and so much that we can use to then make these kind of implementation changes, make these kind of environmental changes within that person's circle of influence. We can understand like the links, if they're having cravings, if they're having just things that don't really help them to feel the best, what are the links that is causing that? This voice really gives us an understanding of what's going on and potentially reasons as to why it's going on for better understanding of dietary patterns and cultural influences. When we embody the voice of the food anthropologist, we are learning from our choices rather than condemning them. And that's what makes it so different from the food police voice. We can notice negative things about certain foods, maybe if it doesn't make us feel the best, maybe if it feels like an excessive amount of cravings or anything, even if it's coming from not so much like a positive kind of way, it's not being labeled as good or bad. It's just being labeled as neutral and data. This perspective allows for overall better just insight overall into where our relationship with food is. And then we can make conscious choices from there without any kind of like moral judgment. Like, it is honestly one of the most kind ways of approaching nutrition and approaching behavior change. It's like one of the most like empowering ways that we can approach nutrition rather than relying on something like the food police that is just so authoritarian. Now, the next positive food voice is called the food nurturer, or just the nurturer. Basically, it is a voice that offers compassion and support. This can really help us cope with any kind of food police voices, any kind of things that are like self-criticizing. The nurturer voice understands the complexities that is accompanied with stepping away from toxic dieting behaviors, and it really puts the focus in on just like dialogue that is kind and supportive and compassionate, and it doesn't keep someone in that spot. It helps them to work through that, to grow and to build a healthier relationship with food. The food nurturer also recognizes how food is just so intertwined with so many aspects of our life, not just for fuel, but that it is connection, joy, culture, experience, love. It is so much more than just fuel. And it tells us that it's okay to have some kind of pleasure from consuming foods. Like, it is okay to enjoy your foods. And the nurturer also really urges one to have that kind of self-kindness, to choose things that are going to be kind for our bodies. And I think sometimes people can hear the word compassion, self-compassion, and think that it is like letting yourself go, when it is the actual opposite. Doing something to like let yourself go. And I mean, like, that could even be a video itself, because oftentimes there are so many, like, most people don't do that intentionally. Like, there are other things going on, like whether it's for mental health reasons or resource reasons, right? Like, nobody like chooses to just, you know, let themselves go, or whatever that means. And even like using that like verbiage itself, I think that it doesn't adequately describe what is really happening. And I think that kind of verbiage, like that statement, can kind of put this idea of like laziness over someone, or it just like simplifies a complex issue. But that's a separate topic. The nurturer really does want to have this kind of self-kindness, this kind of body kindness, and encourages us to have some form of self-care, and that can very much align with physical health. The nurturer also plays a role in just resilience, in having a healthy relationship with food. Sometimes when people are working on building that, they might have a day, maybe they go on vacation or just have an off day, and they really kind of feel like they've gone into a different direction, and they're really not practicing self-kindness and body kindness and kind of that awareness. And that nurturer can help to guide people back towards an approach to food where you are having that curiosity, compassion, and context, ultimately for self-care and nourishment. Now, the next positive food voice is a nutrition ally. This kind of goes along with that note that I mentioned earlier, how sometimes people can hear having compassion and see that as not having intake that is supportive of physical health. The nutrition ally is like a supportive coach in the world of nutrition. It's helping to make choices that are best within the context. It is informed with nutrition information, research, but also informed with your needs and your preferences and what is realistic and sustainable, what is available, and it's applying all of those different aspects. The nutrition ally also helps us navigate nutrition information that's out in the world, and misinformation and fads and myths. It really helps us to recognize which foods are providing us with energy and making us feel our best. And that absolutely contributes to that long-term health kind of focus. And it does all of that while ensuring that guilt is not playing a role in your food choice. Ultimately, the Nutrition Ally really helps us to build meals that support our overall health and it doesn't attach moral value over our food choices. Now, the last positive food voice that we'll be talking about is the Rebel Ally. Now, the Rebel Ally can be really beneficial, helpful. Let's say if you join a new gym or you're in a group of friends or whatever, and somebody has an idea of doing like a 30-day detox or like a 30-day no sugar challenge or whatever. That Rebel Ally can just kind of be that voice to help kind of bring you back to what you know is truly beneficial for yourself. Recognizing like potential restrictive kind of plans and keeping that boundary kind of set. It really helps us defend against restrictions by promoting that mindful and guilt-free eating. Now, all of those positive food voices together, all of those come into play when we think about the food voices, the positive food voices. Now, when somebody is working on building a healthy relationship with food, it is not uncommon, even years down the line, to have the nutrition informant and the food police and even the diet rebel kind of pop up here and there. What we can do is do what we can to lower those food voices as much as possible and raise those positive food voices as much as possible. Like turning down the volume on the negative ones and turning up the volume on the positive ones. Now, sometimes certain kind of experiences, environments, just various things can kind of bring up the food police or the nutrition informant. Even when you think like you're good and all is positive, those little voices can still be there in the background. And I think it is really important to like know that not only that can happen, but to not have guilt and shame if that does happen. You know, you can do all of the work to really build up those positive food voices, but it does not mean that there's anything wrong with you or anything if some of those negative ones pop up. Just as one example, there's plenty of examples. I read the Intuitive Eating book, The Framework, like over a decade ago, and I've gone through it multiple times. And I help other people to go through it, but it is still something that comes up. Those negative food voices can still come up here and there. And just one example was when I had my baby, and there was a time where he needed to be on formula for a little bit. Now, I am a very big proponent of fed is best, and there has been so much research, so much on the safety and the development and the just nourishment that formulas can provide. Like what we can see is that fed is best. Right, but there was a time where I did have some of that kind of nutrition informant and food police show up when I was having to provide some formula for a little bit. And like that was shocking to me because at that time I felt that I had already just like deconstructed so much diet culture and so much just unhelpful food talk. But I was in an environment, in an experience that I hadn't ever been in personally, and so it popped up. And there was guilt and shame and some worry there. And I really had to dig into that and like just recognizing it was uncomfortable. And so I just kind of wanted to share that because while you're on this journey and while you are working on building a healthy relationship with food, those food voices can still pop up here and there. And that is okay. What we can do in those moments is pause and reflect. And if you need to talk with someone or work like something out with someone, that can be really helpful. These positive food voices are really cultivated through like intention. The more we feed, the more we water the positive food voices, the more that they will just be what is most loud when it comes to food voices and helping to approach food with curiosity, compassion, and context. Now I will have a link down below for a download regarding food voices, the negative ones and the positive ones, and also a couple of different activities. There's even like a quiz in there. Like it'll have several different statements and then you can guess like which food voice is talking. I will have that link down below. I'll actually link the PDF itself so that like you can just get it. You don't have to give me your email address or anything, but I will also have another option below that. If you do want to download that with your email address, I do send out weekly emails talking about things like this that are similar to this, really building and strengthening a healthy relationship with food. And so if you do want access to that, you can sign up for that. But if you don't feel comfortable giving your email address to me, then you can just have that download. That is fine. Really, by recognizing these food voices, we can foster a healthy relationship with food. And when we do really build these food voices, it's less about having to remember like all of these different intuitive eating like exercises and application things. The voices themselves can guide through those. So like if you're working on building a healthy relationship with food and you're doing these little like activities, these exercises to help with that application, the goal of those is to build those positive food voices so that you don't have to like think about like implementing all of these different things. They'll just kind of become part of you through those positive food voices. All right, so I would love to hear about your experiences. If you have thought about food voices before, if you have put time and energy into kind of deciphering between them, I'd love to hear your stories in the comments down below. That wraps it up for today's video. Please leave a like if you like this. Make sure you're subscribed. I'd greatly appreciate that. And remember, you can strive for health without subscribing to diet culture. I'll see you later. Bye.